سنای آمریکا، تالار تاریخی کندی کاکس. کنفرانس با حضور سناتورها از هر دو حزب و شخصیت‌های برجسته آمریکایی. سیاست ایران، مقابله با جنگ و تروریسم رژیم، پیشبرد جمهوری آزاد و غیراتمی. 21 آذر 1403.
سخنرانی‌های سناتور تیلس، عضو کمیته های قضایی و مالی سنای آمریکا از حزب جمهوری خواه، سناتور شهین، رئیس جدید دموکرات‌ها در کمیته روابط خارجی سنا، سناتور کوری از رهبری حزب دموکرات در سنای آمریکا، سناتور تد کروز، عضو کمیته های خارجی و قضایی سنای آمریکا از حزب جمهوری خواه، سفیر سام برانبک، سفیر آمریکا برای آزادی مذهبی 2021، فرماندار و سناتور پیشین ایالت کانزاس. ژنرال کیت کلاک، مشاور امنیت ملی معاون رئیس جمهور مایک پنس 2021. ژنرال جیمز جونز، مشاور امنیت ملی رئیس جمهور 2010. ژنرال تاد ولترز، فرمانده ناتو و نیروهای آمریکا در اروپا 2019 تا 2022. مارک گینزبرگ، سفیر پیشین آمریکا در مراکش. محمد عبدالله حضرمی، سفیر یمن در آمریکا، وزیر خارجه یمن 2020.
ژنرال جیمز جونز: تغییر دگرگون کننده در حکومت سوریه باید برای مردم ایران این را به ارمغان بیاورد که تغییر در خاورمیانه حقیقتاً امکان پذیر است. سرنگونی یک رژیم یک چیز است، اما برخورداری از یک برنامه خوب برای روز بعد از سرنگونی رژیم چیز دیگری است. امروز ما باید بار دیگر مثل سوریه بر این ایده متعهد بشویم که تغییر در ایران در راه است. یک تغییر دموکراتیک واضح بر اساس 10 اصل خانم رجوی که همیشه آن را اصول جفرسونی نامیدم. پیشنهاد می‌کنم در آینده نزدیک مردم ایران کتابی دریافت کنند که شامل 2 بخش باشد. بخش اول برنامه 10 ماده‌ای خانم رجوی است و بخش دوم قانون اساسی جدید حکومت ایران است. امیدوارم این کتاب‌ها با برنامه 10 ماده‌ای یک یادآوری باشد از اینکه این یک دموکراسی جفرسونی است که درباره آن صحبت می‌کنیم.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here once again. I think in my 11th year of being associated with this wonderful crusade and this effort to topple a vicious regime that has caused so much damage in the world and still has the potential to wreak havoc in many parts of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, particularly our young people here, we are in a battle involving autocracies and democracies. And the only way we prevail is for the United States and its friends and allies to unite and succeed and make sure that our potential enemies do not misunderstand our resolve or do not think that we have a lack of resolve. And nowhere is this more important than what's going on in the Middle East. The government, the regime in Iran is the head of the snake. So this week we've witnessed yet another tectonic shift in the Syrian government. We'll wait and see what that means. But what it should mean to the people of Iran is that change is in fact possible in the Middle East. You may have to wait for it, but it will come. And I think that if I were a citizen of Iran in opposition to the regime, I would be very encouraged today to know that this is in fact possible. The change in the U.S. administration that is upcoming in the near future has already caused some tectonic shifts in the geographic alignments. One of the lessons I think that all of our speakers have alluded to, directly or indirectly, is that with regard to the regime in Iran, appeasement does not work. Full stop. Appeasement does not work. Another way of saying it is that the Iranian regime does not do nuance. There can be no mistake in how we communicate with that particular regime. The rise of U.S. energy leadership is something that's going to happen in the very near future. It is going to be one of the instruments in our vast array of ways to influence things around the world that we can bring to the table. The renewed emphasis on the necessity of having friends and allies is going to be very important. As we go forward, I think in seeking and achieving regime change in Iran, public-private partnerships are going to be very important. It's one thing to topple a regime, but it's another thing to have a good plan for the day after that regime has been toppled. Make no mistake, Iran is on its heels, but it's still a very dangerous government. I hope that we will reject the idea of appeasement and look in a search for some hope that a moderate Iranian leader can somehow emerge. That is a pipe dream that has no validity. We have been led down that road many, many times, and it's time now to effect a strong policy that will effect a regime change as we pivot away from past failures. Thank you. President Biden has said he will not allow Iran to gain nuclear weapons. Those statements have consequences. Those statements have real meaning. But you must have a plan to make sure that if that doesn't work, that you have the ability to back up that statement. Last year in Paris and in Berlin, we saw a powerful demonstration of support and intent by United States, Canadian, and European nations in Paris. All the while in Berlin, 50,000 people marched in support of the NCRI, Mrs. Rajavi's leadership. Today we meet to recommit to the idea that, as in Syria, change is also coming to Iran. A clear democratic change based on Mrs. Rajavi's 10 points, which I've always labeled as Jeffersonian in principle. So what should we do in 2005? One, I would say continue the education of the American media and the American public with regard to the NCRI, what it is, what it isn't, and what its hopes and aspirations are. Second, continue to build congressional support for a free democratic Iran, as mentioned by the senators who stopped by. Number three, as Mrs. Rajavi indicated on the screen, give hope to the Iranian people that change is coming by talking about expectations the day after the regime falls. Number four, to the extent that you can improve on tightening sanctions on Iranian oil exports, I would recommend that be strongly looked at. And number five, live up to not allowing Iran to develop nuclear weapons and delivery capability of those weapons. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in dangerous times, but dangerous times also have great possibilities. Iran is now recognized for what it is. The NCRI is increasingly recognized by the United States and global media as the voice of opposition for the future of Iran. I carry a small book with me. This is the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. It is the oath of office is the one that the president makes and officers of the American military Kerry. I propose that in the near future, Iranian people be given a book that will have two things to it. Part one is Mrs. Rajavi's 10-point plans. You can. Part two is the Constitution, the new Constitution of the government of Iran. And I hope we have these books with a 10-point plan as a reminder that this is Jeffersonian democracy that we're talking about, and it is a bipartisan issue, and it is an issue that no American can dispute. Thank you very much.
ژنرال کیت کلاک: ما در طول 45 سال گذشته درباره ایران اشتباه کرده ایم و فکر می کنم که رئیس جمهور ترامپ سرانجام شروع به تصحیح آن کرد. به خصوص امروز ضروری است به این شناخت برسیم که سیاست‌های قبلی در قبال رژیم ایران به هدف اعلام شده خود دست نیافته است، یعنی به یک ایران دموکراتیک. مسیر پیش رو فشار مستمر بر رژیم ایران چه از نظر سیاسی چه منطقه‌ای و به صورت جمعی با همه متحدانمان در منطقه است. این رژیم در آستانه سقوط است.
Well, thank you for having me today, and I really appreciate it. You know, the comments we're going to make, it's amazingly consistent. We didn't get together and kind of have these comments beforehand, but all of these comments now are rolling one after another, and there's a consistency to it that I think is important, and it's important that we talk about it today. And so thank you for allowing me to be part of the conference today. You know, I actually started working in the Iran issue back in 1979, and you heard what Senator Tillotson talked about. That's when he first became associated with Iran. But I believe that, you know, we really have misunderestimated Iran for the last 45 years. We just haven't got it right. And as a former military guy, you know, I have to refer sometimes to my military background. And there was a classic military book written by a gentleman by the name of Sun Tzu that was 500 BC. And he said, and it's very true even today, he said, you know, if you know yourself and you know the enemy, you're never going to be in peril. But if you know yourself and not the enemy, your chances of winning and losing are basically equal. And we have been consistently wrong about Iran over the last 45 years, and I think President Trump finally started to get it right. We always seem to assume over the last 45 years that, you know, really, you know, when you look at the Iranian leadership, they're actually Jeffersonian Democrats in disguise, and we kind of had it wrong. And it's been a fault of both Republicans and Democrats as well. And I think there has to be recognition, and a real hard recognition now, especially today, that the previous policies toward the Iranian regime have failed to achieve the declared goal, which is a democratic Iran. You know, I'm reminded what the late Pulitzer Prize winner, a gentleman by the name of Will Durant, said when he actually wrote it, and I didn't read it, but there was an 11-volume treatise on the story of civilization. And he said, and this is a quote, "We seem to be working on the assumption that if we're nice to other people, they will be nice to us." And he commented, "I can tell you in the last 4,000 years, there has been no evidence to support that vision." Let me just briefly go back and kind of walk our way through it, because it faults both Republican and Democrat where we're at. Under President Clinton, we had a simple trade embargo because we sought a moderate mullah to be in charge of Iran. And at that time, the former director of the CIA, and we eventually became the Secretary of Defense, Bob Gates, wrote, he said, moderate mullah, said, in Iran, that does not exist. And George Bush declared Iran to be part of an axis of evil in 2002 State of the Union, and we condemned them for what they have done. We had President Obama come into office, reversing the Bush sanctions, even sending a letter to the then Supreme Leader declaring constant cooperation between the two countries. That was wrong. We actually had Senator Kerry talk about, then the Secretary of State, and the special envoy, Rob Malley, who got a little bit of trouble recently, where he actually downplayed the kind of inspections we were going to have in IAEA. We basically thought that they were going to develop a peaceful nuclear program. You know, and today what they're doing, they're enriching nuclear, the isotopes up to 85%. You know, when you get to 90%, you're weapons grade on enrichment of uranium. Most peaceful uses of uranium, you enrich it between 5 and 6%. And so I think they must have an ulterior motive of where they're trying to go. So what happened is they came up with an event, and even Chuck Schumer broke ranks when he said this is not a good deal. And what happened, they had an unratified presidential executive agreement, which was not a treaty. That actually played well for us when President Trump came in, because it allowed President Trump to actually walk away from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal. And we basically, the Trump administration, we basically said this is not a good place to be, and we wanted to work our way back from it. We began in 2018 a program, we called at the time maximum pressure on the Iranian regime. And economically, it began to work. And it was a program of time. Now, I will tell you, during that administration, the first Trump administration, we actually had people within the administration that thought this was a bad thing to go. Go back to my comment about Jefferson and Democrats. But the pressure began to work. For example, Iran's oil exports dropped from more than 2 million barrels a day to 400,000 barrels a day of export. And we continually kept pushing back on them, to include the elimination of the Quds Force commander, Qasem Soleimani, after the actions that he pulled off in trying to support the overthrow of the U.S. Embassy in New Year's Day of 2020. And so, but President Biden came in and kind of reversed everything we were doing. So it went back to we looked at who they actually were. But here's the good news. The good news is the world is actually changing. And when you see what happened just recently in the past week with Syria, and the breakdown of what was going on and what was happening with Syria, and that, when you see what's happening with Iran, what's happening within Russia, Russia could not react to what was happening with Syria. So all of the problems you're starting to see are starting to change. But in the past week, in the past months, we're starting to see a change in the world, and it's a change for the better. And I think we should know that. So the path forward, constant pressure on the Iranian regime. I think we do that politically. We can do that regionally. We do that collectively with all our allies in the region. But also the power of the press, continually press it, and continually pressing the advantage that we have in Iran. This regime is tottering. And with that, thank you very much. So, Senator, glad you're here. I want to give you
سفیر سامبرانبک: باید از مردم در صحنه در ایران و در سراسر جهان حمایت کرد که به صورت علنی، جسورانه و شفاف با این رژیم مخالفت می کنند. مردم ایران این رژیم را نمی خواهند. تا زمانی که این رژیم در قدرت باشد، صلح در خاورمیانه برقرار نخواهد شد. این لحظه است که باید آن را دریافت.
Thank you, Ambassador. Appreciate that very much. Pleasure to be back here and in the halls in the Senate and in the Kennedy caucus room. It's got such a special memory for so many people here. I've got one very direct, specific thought I would really like to leave with you of the moment we're in right now regarding Iran, the Middle East, and really indeed peace throughout the world. It's not only now or never, it's now or nuclear is where we are facing the moment right now. And I want to develop that briefly for you. It's not only now or never, it's now or nuclear. Either we will see a different regime in Iran shortly, soon, or we will be facing a nuclear Iran. And we are now on the decision-making moment of what it will be like in the Middle East. Will you have a different, peaceful, democratic regime in Iran, or will you face a nuclearized, theocratic regime in Tehran whose theology supports the use of the bomb. To the new incoming Trump administration, I applaud the maximum pressure campaign the first time around, which was quite effective. The second time around, it needs to be even more effective. The maximum pressure campaign needs to include all of the financial pieces to it, security, restraint, but it needs to add another component. It needs to have a political piece to it. It needs to be pushing and supporting the people on the ground in Iran and from around the world that are opposed to this regime, and do so publicly, and do so boldly, and do so clearly. They need the support. We need to do it now, supporting the people like MEK in Iran. So, stated clearly, the maximum pressure campaign 2.0 must include a political pressure component, supporting the protesters, calling for an end to the dictators in Tehran. Now, Tehran's going to go into survival mode now. They're going to start saying, okay, we'll negotiate, we'll talk with people, we want to talk about the nuclear weapons. We cannot accept it. They have done this previously. They always come back and then they get aggressive again. And moving forward, we don't want them. And also, remember, the people of Iran don't want this regime. They don't support this regime. Just like the people in Syria didn't support Assad. There will be no peace in the Middle East as long as this regime is in control. This is the moment to seize. It's not only now or never, it's now or nuclear. That's what we're facing. God bless you all.
ژنرال تاد ولترز: مردم ایران رژیم حاکم را نمی‌خواهند. صلح در خاورمیانه فقط از طریق یک جمهوری آزاد و دموکراتیک در ایران محقق خواهد شد. وظیفه ما این است که آماده باشیم تا برنامه 10 ماده‌ای را اجرا کنیم.
Well, we've heard some fantastic words this afternoon, and let me just start by acknowledging what I have observed as the positive campaign momentum that you all have displayed today. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge who has just represented this great cause. Our Senate, members of our Congress, their staffers, general officers, ambassadors, and all of those individuals are the least important individuals here on these hallowed grounds right now. You in the audience who are willing to roll up your sleeves and give your blood, sweat, and tears to this cause represent the change that is coming and the positive impact that we will have on planet Earth to generate more peace. And that is what we're after. I will try not to repeat any of the very, very sage comments that we just heard, but I wanted to acknowledge several strategic imperatives. The first strategic imperative: the people of Iran do not want this current regime. We must support the people of Iran and neutralize this current regime. The second strategic imperative: generating peace across planet Earth will not occur until we find ways to allow for a peaceful Middle East. And peace in the Middle East will be achieved via a free and democratic Republic of Iran. And this group, at all levels, represents the cause that we must embrace to succeed. The global awareness of those two strategic imperatives must be proliferated. And we can do that together by gatherings such as this and getting the word out, as General Jones talked about, amongst the staffers that represent our United States Congress. I would just like to acknowledge what is so obvious about what just occurred, but I would like to do so through quickly a military lens as a previous commander in Europe representing NATO and the great nations that support the European continent. The most glaring, obvious change as a result of the fall of Assad is the fact that the nexus that exists in nefarious activity from Iran to the west to Syria, to the eastern Mediterranean, to Eastern Europe, to the Baltic Sea, to the Arctic and to the Atlantic has just been broken. The proxies that this terrible regime relies upon to gain influence and capability from east to west to the Eastern Mediterranean has been broken. And this is something that we need to acknowledge, we need to make others aware of, we need to educate, and now most importantly, we need to act upon. And as so many of our briefers highlighted, and I think they did so with great precision, we do so via strength, not weakness. We do so by being precise in exactly what it is we need to do to ensure that we can have a free and democratic Iran. And as you heard from so many of our speakers, we must go forward in making sure that we can find ways to get the regime done, to ensure that we are precise in the neutralization of any nuclear capability that exists in Iran, as the ambassador so sagely pointed out. And we must have a plan in place to move forward. And as the great Madame spoke to us when we started, she has a 10-point plan. So many of you are very, very aware of her 10-point plan. She most recently spoke last month in November, giving us additional icing on the cake of that 10-point plan. And I believe that our job is to make sure that we are ready to implement a 10-point plan. I can't thank all of you enough for what you've done and for what you'll continue to do. It is a noble cause. Here in this hallowed building, in this hallowed conference center, we are talking about something that is going to generate greater peace across planet Earth, and it's very exciting for all of us. God bless you all, and thank you.
محمد عبدالله حضرمی: تحولی در حال وقوع است و معتقدم مردم یمن و ایران شایسته فرصتی برای رهایی از ظلم رژیم ایران و نیروهای نیابتی آن هستند. امیدوارم این اتفاق به سرعت رخ بدهد. مطمئنم که روزی مردم یمن و مردم ایران قادر خواهند بود خود را از ظلم رژیم ایران و نیروهای نیابتی آن آزاد کنند.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm really honored to be here, especially after the powerful statement that we heard, especially from Senators Ted Cruz, and I agree with him completely. Change is in the air, and I think the Yemeni people and the Iranian people deserve a chance to rid themselves of the tyranny of the Iranian regime and their proxy, and I hope that will come very fast. I am honored to address you today on behalf of Yemen, a nation striving for peace despite enduring profound challenges and a decade of conflict exacerbated by the Iranian regime, relentless ambition to dominate the region. Yemen's suffering is not merely a tragedy. It is the deliberate result of Iran's support for chaos and regional instability. For more than 10 years, Iran has financed and armed the Houthi terrorist group, providing them with lethal weapons to destabilize Yemen and threaten international shipping lane in the Red Sea. Tragically, Iran's support has enabled the Houthis to become a menace not only to Yemen, but to the region and the world. The Red Sea is a critical commercial shipping corridor that handles 10% of global trade and over 30% of annual cargo shipping. The US alone spends so much in the billions defending attacks that the Iranian regime spends so little on. The Houthis must be stopped, and Yemenis can stop them. While the Houthis receive free oil and gas from Iran, they, using Iranian weapons, have crippled Yemen's ability to export our own resources, hindering our government's capacity to pay salaries, provide services, or mount an effective counteroffensive. Yemenis have the determination and ability to defeat the Houthis, restore state institutions, and bring peace to our nation. And a new US strategy is critical to help us do just that. The Houthis are not inherently powerful. Their strength comes solely from Iran and its revolutionary guards. With the right strategy, this support can be neutralized. I propose 3 measures for the new US policy on this aspect. First, designating the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. This step, similar to the designations of Hezbollah and the IRGC, would send a strong message that their actions, terrorizing civilians, targeting maritime security, and destabilizing the regions, are unacceptable. Second, supporting the Yemeni government and military to liberate the port of Hodeidah. Securing this vital port in the Red Sea west of Yemen will enable us to protect the Red Sea, and it will also pressure them to engage in meaningful peace talks. It would cut the support of Iran to Yemen. It's just as simple as that. And it's not going to cost much for us, Yemenis, and the military to liberate Hodeidah. We were about this close to do it in 2018, but we were stopped by the international community. I think it's time that we liberate that port. Third, holding militia leaders accountable for their atrocities will weaken their operations and disrupt their ability to act with impunity. I'm afraid this is the only way. Diplomacy alone does not work with the Iranian regimes and their proxies. We have tried it for so many years. Peace through strength works. And I hope, and I'm confident that one day the Yemeni people and the Iranian people would be able to free themselves from the tyranny of the Iranian regimes and their proxies. I thank you very much.